There comes a time in every person's life when the true value of their pursuits is called into question. It is often in the quietest moments, when the distractions of the world fall away and we are left alone with our thoughts, that we begin to confront the profound truths we have long avoided. We start to realize that the things we have chased with such fervor, the goals we have placed at the center of our existence, may not be the things that bring us lasting peace or fulfillment. It is in these reflective moments that we must ask ourselves, what truly matters? Is it the wealth we accumulate, the power we wield, the respect we command, or is it something deeper, something that endures beyond the fleeting fortunes of the world? In the heart of an ancient city, nestled within the intricate web of bustling markets and narrow, winding streets, there lived a merchant whose name was spoken with admiration and envy. His wealth was legendary, his influence far-reaching. He was a man who had mastered the art of commerce, turning even the smallest opportunities into great fortunes. The city itself, a vibrant hub of trade where merchants from all corners of the world converged, was a place where fortunes could be made and lost in the blink of an eye. Here, success was measured by the weight of gold in one's coffers, and the merchant, with his vast wealth and sprawling empire, stood at the pinnacle of this material world. But as the seasons changed and the tides of fortune began to shift, the merchant found himself facing a new and unfamiliar reality. The markets that had once brought him prosperity now turned against him. The alliance he had built over decades began to crumble, and the wealth he had so carefully amassed started to slip through his fingers like sand. The more he tried to hold on, the more he realized that his wealth, once his greatest source of pride, had become his greatest burden. It was in this moment of crisis, when the foundations of his empire were shaken to their core, that the merchant was forced to confront a question that had haunted him in his quietest moments. What is the true measure of success? This is the story of a man who, standing on the precipice of ruin, discovered that the true measure of a life well lived is not found in the riches one possesses, but in the wisdom with which one navigates the inevitable trials of existence. It is a story that speaks to the very essence of Stoic philosophy, offering timeless lessons on the nature of wealth, the pursuit of virtue, and the cultivation of inner peace. The merchant's journey is one of transformation, of moving beyond the superficial markers of success to discover a deeper, more enduring form of wealth. Guided by the principles of Stoicism, the merchant will learn that the path to true contentment lies not in the relentless pursuit of material gain, but in the development of inner strength and moral clarity. He will come to understand that while fortune is fickle and the world is ever-changing, the one thing that remains within his control is his own character, his ability to face life's challenges with courage, wisdom, and grace. Through his trials, the merchant will realize that true wealth is not something that can be lost or taken away, because it resides not in his possessions, but in his ability to live in accordance with his values. As you listen to this audiobook, The Merchant's Last Stand, a journey of wealth and wisdom, you will be drawn into a narrative that is both timeless and deeply relevant to our modern lives. The lessons embedded in this story are as applicable today as they were in the ancient world, offering guidance on how to navigate the complexities of life with clarity, resilience, and purpose. Whether you are facing your own challenges, re-evaluating your priorities, or simply seeking to deepen your understanding of what it means to live well, this story will provide valuable insights and inspiration. This tale is more than just a story of one man's struggle. It is a reflection on the universal human experience of facing loss, uncertainty, and change. In a world that often equates success with material wealth and external achievements, The merchant's journey serves as a powerful reminder that true fulfillment comes from within. It is a call to examine our own lives and consider where we place our value, how we measure our success, and what we ultimately seek to achieve. Are we, like the merchant, chasing after fleeting goals that can be swept away by the whims of fate? Or are we cultivating the inner resources, wisdom, resilience, and virtue that can sustain us through any storm? As we embark on this journey together, let the merchant story inspire you to look beyond the surface of your own life. Consider how the principles of Stoicism, with their emphasis on inner strength and ethical living, might offer you a path to greater peace and fulfillment. The world is unpredictable, and fortune can be as cruel as it is kind. But with the right mindset and values, you can navigate its challenges with confidence and grace. This audiobook, The Merchant's Last Stand, A Journey of Wealth and Wisdom, belongs to Stoic Stories, all rights reserved. Join us as we explore this powerful narrative and discover the enduring wisdom of Stoic philosophy. A wisdom that can help you find peace and purpose, no matter the circumstances you face. Chapter 1. The Height of Prosperity. In the heart of the ancient city, where the hum of commerce never ceased and the scent of spices from distant lands mingled with the salty sea air, there was a man whose name was synonymous with wealth and success. His name was Lucius Varro, a merchant whose fortune had grown so vast that it was said even the city's treasury was dwarfed by his wealth. Varro's life was a testament to the power of ambition, a relentless pursuit of prosperity that had carried him from the dusty stalls of a humble market to the opulent halls of his sprawling villa overlooking the city. Varro's story was the kind that inspired awe and envy in equal measure. Born into a family of modest means, he had learned the value of hard work at an early age. His father, a small-time trader, had instilled in him the belief that fortune favored the bold and that success was the result of shrewdness and persistence. Lucius took these lessons to heart, and by the time he was a young man, he had already begun to carve out a name for himself in the city's bustling markets. The city itself was a living organism, its lifeblood the endless exchange of goods, ideas, and wealth. It was a place where fortunes could be made overnight and lost just as quickly, where the clang of coins in the marketplace was as constant as the rhythm of the tides. Merchants like Varro were its heartbeat, driving the economy forward with their deals, their ships, and their insatiable hunger for profit. Lucius Varro was not just any merchant, he was the merchant. His ships sailed to the farthest corners of the known world, bringing back silks from the east, spices from the south, and precious metals from the north. His warehouses were filled with goods that kings and emperors coveted, and his network of agents and traders was unrivaled. Every market in the city bore his mark. Every transaction was a testament to his influence. From the poorest beggar to the wealthiest noble, all knew the name of Varro, and all respected the power it commanded. Yet for all his wealth and success, there was an edge to Varro, a restlessness that drove him to constantly seek more. His wealth, vast as it was, never seemed enough. Each new deal, each successful venture, brought only a fleeting sense of satisfaction, quickly replaced by the desire for the next triumph. Varro lived in a state of perpetual motion, his mind always racing ahead to the next opportunity, the next conquest. He was a man driven not just by the desire for wealth, but by a deeper, more insidious need. The need to prove his worth, to show the world and himself that he was more than just the son of a small-time trader. This drive had served him well, propelling him to the heights of success, but it had also taken its toll. For all his wealth, Varro was a man who knew little peace. His nights were often sleepless, his mind consumed with the intricacies of his business, the risks and rewards of his ventures. Even in his moments of triumph, there was a part of him that remained unsatisfied, a void that no amount of gold could fill. The city's market, where Varro's influence was most keenly felt, was a place of constant activity, a vibrant, chaotic environment where traders haggled, buyers bargained, and goods changed hands at a dizzying pace. It was here that Varro felt most alive, surrounded by the energy and the noise, the endless opportunities to make a profit. He moved through the market like a king among his subjects, his presence commanding attention and respect. Merchants and traders bowed their heads as he passed, eager for a word of advice, a nod of approval, or even just a glance from the man who had mastered the art of commerce. Varro's success was not just due to his hard work and shrewdness, though these qualities were undoubtedly a part of it. He had a mind that could see connections where others saw only chaos, that could predict market trends with uncanny accuracy, that could turn even the smallest opportunity into a lucrative venture. But more than that, he had an instinct for people, a natural ability to read their desires and fears, to understand what motivated them and how to leverage that understanding to his advantage. In the cutthroat world of commerce, where trust was often a luxury and deception a necessity, Varro's ability to navigate the complexities of human nature was one of his greatest assets. Yet despite his many talents, Varro was not without his flaws. His relentless pursuit of wealth had made him ruthless, sometimes at the expense of his relationships and his own well-being. He was known to drive hard bargains, to squeeze every last ounce of profit from a deal, sometimes leaving his partners and rivals with little more than scraps. This ruthlessness, while contributing to his success, had also earned him a fair share of enemies, men and women who resented his dominance, who envied his success, and who would have rejoiced at his downfall. But Varro paid little heed to the whispers of jealousy and resentment that followed him. He was too focused on his goals, too consumed by the need to keep moving forward, to keep growing his empire. He viewed the world as a game, a complex, ever-changing puzzle that he was determined to solve, and for many years he played the game better than anyone else, amassing wealth and power beyond his wildest dreams. However, as time passed, the pressures of his success began to weigh on him. The stakes were always high, the risks ever present. Each new venture carried the potential for both great reward and devastating loss, and the burden of these risks began to take a toll on Varro's health and peace of mind. His once sharp instincts began to dull, his confidence wavered, and for the first time in his life he found himself questioning the path he had chosen. It was during this period of growing uncertainty that Varro encountered a series of setbacks that would change the course of his life. Deals that had once seemed foolproof began to falter, alliances that had once been solid began to crumble, and the markets that had always been his domain turned against him. The very wealth that had been the source of his power and pride became the source of his greatest anxiety as he watched it slowly, inexorably slip away. Varro was a man accustomed to controlling his destiny, to bending the world to his will, but as his fortunes waned, he found himself confronted with a harsh reality. There were forces in the world that even his wealth and influence could not overcome. The markets, with their unpredictable swings and capricious whims, cared nothing for his ambitions or his pride. They were as indifferent to his struggles as the tides were to the ships that sailed upon them. In the face of these challenges, Varro's mind, once so focused and clear, became a battleground of conflicting emotions. He felt anger at the unfairness of it all, fear at the prospect of losing everything he had worked so hard to build, and a deep, gnawing sense of despair as he realized that his entire life had been built on a foundation as unstable as the shifting sands of the market. As his wealth continued to dwindle, Varro began to withdraw from the world he had once dominated. The marketplace, once his kingdom, became a place of dread, filled with reminders of his failures and the ever-present threat of ruin. He avoided his former associates, shunned the social gatherings where he had once been the center of attention, and retreated into the solitude of his villa, where he spent long hours brooding over his losses and contemplating the uncertain future that lay before him. It was in this state of despair that Varro found himself standing at a crossroads, facing a dilemma that no amount of wealth could resolve. He could continue to fight against the tide, clinging to the hope that he could somehow regain his former glory, or he could confront the deeper questions that had haunted him for so long. What was the true purpose of his life? What did it mean to be successful? And what, if anything, could bring him lasting peace and fulfillment? This chapter in Varro's life, though filled with uncertainty and fear, was also the beginning of a journey that would lead him to a profound transformation. For in the depths of his despair, Varro would encounter a new way of thinking, one that challenged his most deeply held beliefs and offered a path to a different kind of wealth, one that could not be measured in gold or possessions, but in the strength of his character and the serenity of his mind. As the story of Lucius Varro unfolds, it will become clear that his greatest challenge was not the loss of his wealth, but the inner struggle to redefine his values and discover what truly mattered in life. And it is through this struggle that Varro will come to understand the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy, learning that true success is not about the accumulation of external wealth, but about living in accordance with one's principles and finding peace in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Chapter 2. The Fall. The world of commerce, like the sea, is as unpredictable as it is vast. One day it can carry you forward on the crest of a wave, and the next it can drag you under into a whirlpool of despair. For Lucius Varro, the fall from grace began slowly, almost imperceptibly, before it gathered momentum, threatening to engulf everything he had built over a lifetime. It started with a shipment delayed by storms. In the grand scheme of Varro's empire, it was a minor setback, hardly worth his attention. His warehouses were still full, his markets still bustling with activity. The delayed goods were valuable, but Varro's extensive network could easily absorb the loss. He brushed it off as a temporary inconvenience, confident that his business would weather the disruption. But this was only the beginning. Next came the news of a betrayal. One of his most trusted agents, a man who had been with him for years, had been found siphoning off profits and selling information to rivals. The discovery sent shockwaves through Varro's operations. He had always prided himself on his ability to judge character, to surround himself with loyal, competent people who shared his vision. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the financial losses it entailed, but because it struck at the foundation of trust upon which Varro had built his empire. He dealt with the traitor swiftly and ruthlessly, making an example of him to deter others from following the same path. But the damage was done. Rivals, emboldened by the cracks they saw forming in Varro's once unassailable fortress, began to move against him. Contracts were lost, deals that had once seemed secure began to unravel, and competitors who had long been held at bay by Varro's dominance started to encroach on his territory. As these challenges mounted, Varro's sense of control began to slip. The markets, which had once been his playground, now seemed hostile and unpredictable. Prices fluctuated wildly, driven by forces beyond his understanding or control. Each day brought fresh uncertainties, and the strategies that had once brought him success now seemed ineffective, even counterproductive. The wealth that had been his shield, protecting him from the vicissitudes of life, was now a source of constant anxiety. In response, Varro doubled down on his efforts. He worked longer hours, scrutinized every deal, every transaction, every ledger, with an intensity that bordered on obsession. His mind raced with plans and contingencies, desperate to regain the upper hand. But no matter how hard he pushed, the tide continued to turn against him. The markets, indifferent to his struggles, followed their own rhythms, rising and falling with no regard for the fortunes of any one man. Sleep became a distant memory for Varro. His nights were spent pacing the floors of his villa, his thoughts consumed by the spiraling descent of his empire. His once sharp mind, now clouded by fatigue and stress, began to falter. Decisions that had once come easily now seemed fraught with uncertainty. Each choice felt like a gamble, and the stakes had never been higher. As his financial situation worsened, so too did his relationships. Friends and allies, sensing the shift in his fortunes, began to distance themselves. The social gatherings where Varro had once been the center of attention grew sparse, and the invitations that had once flowed freely began to dry up. In the eyes of the city, Varro was no longer the untouchable titan of commerce. He was a man on the brink of ruin. In this time of crisis, Varro's thoughts often turned inward. He had always believed that his wealth and success were the result of his own hard work and intelligence, the rewards of a life well lived. But as he watched everything he had built begin to crumble, he was forced to confront a new and unsettling reality. Perhaps his success had been more fragile, more dependent on factors beyond his control than he had ever cared to admit. The realization brought with it a deep sense of fear and uncertainty. If his wealth could be lost so easily, what did that say about its true value? And if his life's work could be swept away by forces beyond his control, what did that say about the nature of success itself? These questions haunted Varro as he moved through his days, a shadow of the man he had once been. His confidence, once his greatest asset, was now his greatest liability, as it prevented him from seeing the truth that had been there all along, that he had built his life on a foundation of sand, and now the tides were coming in. It was during this dark period that Varro received a visit from an old acquaintance, a philosopher who had long ago left the bustling life of the city for the quiet solitude of the countryside. The philosopher had once been a regular at Varro's dinner table, where they had debated the merits of wealth, power, and virtue late into the night. Varro had always dismissed the philosopher's teachings as impractical, the musings of a man who did not understand the realities of commerce and the world. But now, in his hour of need, Varro found himself reaching out to the philosopher, seeking wisdom that went beyond the transactional, beyond the immediate demands of his crumbling empire. The philosopher arrived quietly, with none of the pomp that Varro's other guests had once displayed. He was a man of simple means, but his presence carried a calm assurance that Varro found both unsettling and comforting. They spoke for hours, the conversation flowing between the practical and the philosophical, the immediate and the eternal. The philosopher listened patiently as Varro poured out his troubles, his fears, his regrets. And when Varro had finished, the philosopher spoke not of markets or wealth, but of the nature of control and the limits of human power. Lucius, the philosopher said, you have spent your life building an empire of wealth, believing that it would give you control over your destiny. But control, true control, is an illusion. The markets rise and fall, fortunes come and go, and there is little we can do to change that. What we can control, what we must control, is ourselves, our thoughts, our actions, our reactions to the world around us. That is where true power lies, not in gold, but in the strength of our character. Varro listened, the words resonating with a truth he had long avoided. He had always believed that his wealth would protect him, that it was a measure of his worth and success. But now, as he faced the prospect of losing it all, he realized that his wealth had become a prison, chaining him to a life of anxiety and fear. The philosopher continued, "Wealth is neither good nor bad in itself. It is indifferent. What matters is how we use it, how we view it, and whether we allow it to define us. You have allowed your wealth to become your identity, and now that it is threatened, you are threatened. But you are more than your wealth, Lucius. You are a man of intelligence, of drive, of potential. Do not let the loss of gold be the loss of yourself." These words struck Varro deeply. For the first time in his life, he began to see his situation not as a disaster, but as an opportunity, a chance to redefine his life, to find meaning beyond the accumulation of wealth. The philosopher introduced him to the teachings of Stoicism, a philosophy that emphasized the importance of focusing on what was within one's control and letting go of attachment to external outcomes. Varro learned that the Stoics viewed wealth, power, and status as indifference, things that are neither inherently good nor bad, but that gain value only through the way we use them. What truly mattered, the Stoics taught, was virtue, living in accordance with reason, justice, courage, and temperance. It was a radical shift in perspective for Varro, who had spent his life chasing after the very things that the Stoics deemed indifferent. But as he began to internalize these teachings, Varro found a sense of peace that had long eluded him. The fear and anxiety that had once consumed him began to recede, replaced by a growing understanding that his true wealth lay not in his possessions, but in his ability to live in harmony with his values. He started to see his losses not as failures, but as opportunities to practice resilience, to cultivate inner strength, and to let go of the illusions of control that had ruled his life. In this new mindset, Varro began to approach his business differently. He stopped obsessing over every fluctuation in the market, stopped trying to control every outcome. Instead, he focused on what he could control: his decisions, his reactions, his integrity. He dealt fairly with his partners, even when it meant taking a loss, and he treated his employees with respect, understanding that their loyalty and hard work were more valuable than any sum of money. And slowly the tides began to turn. The markets remained as unpredictable as ever, but Varro's newfound perspective allowed him to navigate them with a calm that had once seemed impossible. He made fewer deals, but the ones he made were grounded in careful consideration and ethical principles. His wealth began to stabilize, and though it would never reach the heights it once had, it no longer defined him. Varro's transformation did not go unnoticed. Those who had once seen him as a ruthless, relentless businessman now saw a man of wisdom and integrity. His reputation, once built on fear and power, was now based on respect and admiration. And though he had lost much, Varro found that he had gained something far more valuable, a sense of peace, of purpose, and of true wealth that could never be taken from him. In the end, the fall of Lucius Varro was not a tragedy, but a rebirth. He had been brought low, but in the process, he... Chapter 3, The Inner Struggle. The transformation of Lucius Varro was not an overnight revelation, but a slow, arduous process, marked by deep internal conflict and moments of profound self-doubt. Despite the newfound perspective he had gained from the philosopher's teachings, Varro found himself struggling to fully embrace the Stoic ideals that had begun to reshape his understanding of the world. The habits of a lifetime, the relentless pursuit of wealth, the need for control, these were not easily abandoned. Varro's inner struggle was rooted in a deep-seated fear, a fear that had driven him for as long as he could remember, the fear of failure, of losing everything he had worked so hard to build, was a constant presence in his mind. Even as he tried to adopt the Stoic principles of detachment and acceptance, the old fears would resurface, pulling him back into the very mindset he was trying to escape. Each morning Varro would rise with the dawn, the city still quiet beneath the first light of day. He would sit in his private study, a room once filled with ledgers and maps of trade routes, now sparsely furnished with only a few scrolls of Stoic philosophy and a single candle to light the darkness. Here, in the stillness of the early hours, Varro would meditate on the teachings of the Stoics, repeating to himself the maxims that had begun to guide his life. Focus on what is within your control. Let go of what is not. Virtue is the only true good. But no matter how often he repeated these words, the doubts remained. Was it truly possible to let go of his attachment to wealth, to view the loss of his fortune as nothing more than the natural ebb and flow of life? Could he really detach himself from the outcomes of his actions when those outcomes had defined his entire existence? These questions gnawed at him, leaving him restless and uncertain. In the marketplace, where he had once moved with the confidence of a man who knew his place in the world, Varro now felt like an outsider. The bustling energy that had once invigorated him now seemed overwhelming. The noise and chaos, a reminder of the uncertainty that had come to dominate his life. He watched as other merchants, many of whom he had mentored or competed against, continued to thrive, their fortunes growing as his own diminished. A pang of envy would stab at his heart, followed by a wave of guilt for feeling such a base emotion. Envy, he reminded himself, was a sign of attachment, of valuing the external over the internal, and it was a weakness he needed to overcome. Varro's internal conflict extended beyond the marketplace. In his personal life, the relationships he had long neglected in favor of his business now came into sharp focus. His wife, Claudia, had always been a patient and understanding partner, but even she had grown distant in recent years, weary of the relentless demands of his ambition. His children, now grown, had followed their own paths, largely independent of their father's influence. Varro realized, with a pang of regret, that he had missed so much. Moments of joy, of connection, of simple, quiet contentment, all sacrificed on the altar of success. In his attempts to reconnect with his family, Varro faced yet another challenge. How could he explain the changes he was going through, the doubts and fears that now consumed him? How could he convey the significance of the Stoic teachings that had begun to reshape his life, when he himself was still grappling with their implications? Claudia, ever the pragmatist, listened patiently as Varro spoke of his struggles, but he could see the confusion in her eyes. She had stood by him through years of prosperity and power, and now she watched as he seemed to willingly embrace a path that led away from those very things. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of their garden, Varro tried once again to explain. "Claudia," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of his thoughts, "I have spent my life chasing after wealth, believing that it would bring us security, happiness, and respect. But now, as I see it slipping away, I realize that I have been wrong. These things, wealth, power, they are not the true measure of a man. They are fleeting, subject to the whims of fate. What truly matters, I'm beginning to see, is how we live, how we face the challenges that come our way, and whether we can find peace within ourselves, regardless of what the world throws at us." Claudia looked at him, her brow furrowed in thought. "But Lucius," she replied gently, "you have always been a man of action, of ambition. How can you simply let go of everything you've worked for? How can you find peace in losing what has defined your life? Varro sighed, the question echoing his own doubts. I don't know, he admitted. It's something I'm still trying to understand. The Stoics teach that we must focus on what we can control, our actions, our responses, our character, and let go of the rest. But it's not easy, Claudia. Every instinct in me wants to fight, to hold on to what we've built. Yet I feel that if I continue on that path, I will lose something far more important than wealth. I will lose myself. Claudia was silent for a moment, her hand resting gently on his. Lucius, she said softly, whatever path you choose, know that I am with you. I may not fully understand this journey you are on, but I see the pain it has caused you, and if finding peace means letting go of the past, then perhaps that is what we must do. Her words, though simple, brought Varro a measure of comfort. He had not expected her to fully grasp the philosophical struggle he was facing, but her support meant more to him than any amount of gold. In that moment he realized that his relationships, his family, his friends, were not just another part of his life to be managed or maintained. They were the foundation upon which his true wealth was built. As Varro continued his journey, the internal struggle persisted. Each day was a battle between the old habits of a lifetime and the new principles he was trying to embrace. There were moments of clarity, when the Stoic teachings seemed to fall into place, offering a glimpse of the peace he sought. But there were also moments of despair, when the weight of his losses and the fear of the unknown threatened to overwhelm him. The philosopher who had become a regular visitor to Varro's villa offered guidance and support, but he did not provide easy answers. The path you are on is not a straight one, Lucius, he would often remind Varro. It is full of twists and turns, setbacks and challenges, but it is in these moments of struggle that we grow, that we learn to temper our souls and strengthen our resolve. Do not seek to escape the struggle. Embrace it, for it is the crucible in which true wisdom is forged. Varro took these words to heart, even as he struggled to put them into practice. He began to see his life not as a series of successes and failures, but as a journey of continuous learning and growth. The setbacks he faced were not punishments or signs of failure, but opportunities to test his character and deepen his understanding of himself and the world. One day, as he walked through the marketplace, Varro overheard a conversation between two young merchants. They were discussing a recent deal that had gone awry, lamenting their losses and cursing their luck. Varro recognized in their voices the same frustration and despair that had once plagued him. But instead of feeling superior or disconnected, he felt a deep sense of empathy. He wanted to share with them what he had learned, to tell them that their losses did not define them, that there was a way to find peace even in the face of failure. But he knew that this was a lesson they would have to discover for themselves, just as he had. As he continued on his way, Varro reflected on how much he had changed. The man who had once thrived on the hustle and bustle of the marketplace now walked through it with a sense of detachment, observing but not becoming entangled in its chaos. He no longer felt the need to prove himself, to chase after every opportunity or cling to every coin. Instead, he focused on living in accordance with his principles, on finding balance between his ambitions and his inner peace. The inner struggle was far from over, but Varro had begun to make peace with it. He understood now that this struggle was a part of life, an ongoing process that would continue as long as he lived. The key was not to eliminate the struggle, but to approach it with the right mindset, with patience, humility, and a commitment to living virtuously, no matter what challenges arose. In the quiet moments, when the noise of the world receded and Varro was left alone with his thoughts, he found a growing sense of contentment. He had lost much, but he had gained something far more valuable, a sense of purpose, a connection to something greater than himself. The wealth that had once defined him was no longer the center of his life. Instead, he was building a new foundation, one based on the timeless principles of Stoicism, on the pursuit of wisdom, and on the cultivation of inner peace. As Varro's journey continued, the struggles he faced became less about the external challenges of the marketplace and more about the internal challenges of living a life of virtue. He knew that he would never be free from doubt or fear, but he also knew that these emotions did not have to control him. With each passing day, he grew stronger, more resilient, and more at peace with the man he was becoming. Chapter 4. The Decision. The turning point in Lucius Varro's life came not with a dramatic event, but with a quiet, internal realization, one that had been building for months, shaped by his conversations with the philosopher, his meditations on Stoic principles, and his growing disillusionment with the world he had once so fervently embraced. The external pressures had not abated. The market was still volatile, his wealth still threatened. Yet, amidst the chaos, Varro felt a calm resolve taking root within him. It was time to make a decision that would define not only his future, but the legacy he would leave behind. The decision Varro faced was as much about his own identity as it was about his business. The world he had known, the one where success was measured by the weight of gold and the breadth of influence, had begun to seem hollow, devoid of the deeper meaning he now sought. He had spent his life accumulating wealth, believing it would bring him security and respect, but he had come to see that these were illusions, fleeting and fragile, like sandcastles before the tide. Varro's decision was not merely about choosing between continuing his pursuit of wealth or abandoning it altogether. It was about redefining what success meant to him. The merchant who had once measured his worth in profits and power now sought a different kind of wealth, one rooted in virtue, wisdom, and inner peace. But the path to this new vision of success was fraught with uncertainty. Could he truly let go of his past ambitions, or would the lure of the old ways draw him back into the cycle of anxiety and fear? The decision loomed over Varro as he stood on the balcony of his villa, overlooking the city that had been both his kingdom and his prison. The city's pulse was as relentless as ever, markets bustling with activity, ships coming and going in the harbor, people hurrying about their business. But for Varro, the city had taken on a different character. It was no longer just a place of commerce and opportunity. It was a reflection of the world's impermanence, a reminder that nothing in life is truly stable or secure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Varro found himself once again in the company of the philosopher. They sat together in the garden, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and the soft hum of cicadas. The philosopher, as always, was patient and calm, his presence a steadying influence on Varro's restless mind. "I feel as though I am standing at a crossroads," Varro confessed, his voice heavy with the weight of his thoughts. "On one side, the path I have always known, the pursuit of wealth, power, success as the world defines it. On the other, a path that is still unclear to me, but one that I believe may lead to something more lasting, more meaningful. But I am afraid, my friend, afraid of what I might lose if I choose the wrong path." The philosopher regarded him with a thoughtful expression, his eyes reflecting the fading light of the evening. "Fear is natural, Lucius," he said gently. "It is part of the human condition, but we must not let it guide our decisions. Instead, we must rely on reason, on our understanding of what is truly important. You have spent your life building an empire of wealth, but you have also begun to see the limitations of that pursuit. The question you must ask yourself is this: what do you truly seek? Is it security, respect, power, or is it something deeper? Varro remained silent for a moment, contemplating the philosopher's words. "I seek peace," he finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I seek the kind of peace that cannot be shaken by the rise and fall of markets, that is not dependent on the whims of fortune, but I do not know how to achieve it." The philosopher smiled faintly, a look of quiet understanding in his eyes. "The peace you seek, Lucius, is not something that can be bought or earned. It is something that must be cultivated within. It is the peace that comes from knowing that you have lived according to your values, that you have acted with integrity and wisdom, regardless of the external outcomes. The Stoics teach us that we cannot control the world, only our responses to it. If you can truly internalize this, you will find the peace you seek, even in the midst of uncertainty." Varro nodded, the philosopher's words resonating deeply within him. He realized that the decision he faced was not just about whether to continue his business or to abandon it. It was about how he chose to live his life, how he defined his own success, and whether he could find the courage to let go of the illusions that had guided him for so long. The next day, Varro made his way to the marketplace, not as the commanding presence he had once been, but as a man seeking clarity. He walked through the familiar streets, observing the merchants haggling over prices, the buyers examining goods, the endless flow of commerce that had once been his lifeblood. But today, it all felt different. The energy that had once invigorated him now seemed distant, almost foreign. He realized that he no longer felt the same connection to this world, that his priorities had shifted in ways he had not fully understood until this moment. As he stood before his main warehouse, the hub of his trading empire, Varro knew what he had to do. He called for a meeting of his most trusted advisors and partners, men and women who had been with him through the highs and lows of his career. When they had all gathered, he addressed them with a calm he had not felt in years. "I have called you here today," Varro began, "because I have made a decision. For many years I have devoted myself to the pursuit of wealth and success, and together we have built something remarkable. But I've come to realize that my life's work has been guided by values that no longer hold meaning for me. I've sought security in wealth, but it has brought me nothing but anxiety. I've sought respect in power, but it has only isolated me from those I care about. And I have sought happiness in success, but it has left me feeling empty." His advisors listened in stunned silence, not expecting this moment of vulnerability from a man who had always been so focused, so determined. Varro continued, "I have decided to step back from this life, to find a new path, one that is not dictated by the pursuit of external wealth, but by the cultivation of inner peace. I will be handing over the day-to-day operations of the business to you, my trusted partners, and I trust that you will guide it with the same integrity and wisdom that you have always shown." There were murmurs of surprise and concern, but Varro remained resolute. He knew that his decision would be met with resistance, that some would see it as a retreat, a surrender. But he also knew that this was the right path for him. He had built his life around the idea that success was defined by what he could achieve in the world, but now he understood that true success was defined by who he was, by the principles he lived by, and by the peace he could find within himself. As the meeting concluded, Varro felt a sense of relief, as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he was not driven by fear or ambition, but by a sense of purpose that transcended the material world. He was ready to embark on a new journey, one that would challenge him in ways he had never imagined, but that would also offer him the peace and fulfillment he had long sought. In the days that followed, Varro began to disentangle himself from the web of business that had defined his life. He sold off some of his assets, restructured others, and made arrangements to ensure that his family would be provided for. But more importantly, he began to focus on the things that truly mattered to him, the relationships he had neglected, the inner work he had avoided, the pursuit of wisdom and virtue that had been overshadowed by the demands of his career. Varro's decision did not mean that he abandoned his business entirely. He continued to oversee it from a distance, offering guidance and support to those who now managed it. But his involvement was no longer driven by the need for control or the fear of loss. Instead, it was guided by a desire to ensure that his legacy was one of integrity, that his business operated with the same principles he now sought to embody in his own life. As Varro's life changed, so too did his relationships. Claudia, who had stood by him through his struggles, became his closest confidant, and together they began to rebuild the bond that had been strained by years of neglect. His children, once distant, began to see their father in a new light, not as a distant figure driven by ambition, but as a man who had found a new sense of purpose and peace. The decision Varro had made was not an easy one, nor was it without its challenges. There were moments when he doubted himself, when the old fears and anxieties crept back in. But each time, he reminded himself of the Stoic principles that had guided his choice, that true wealth lay not in external possessions, but in the strength of his character, that success was not about achieving power or control, but about living in accordance with his values, and that peace could only be found within through the cultivation of wisdom, courage, and virtue. In the end, Varro's decision was not just a turning point in his own life, but a message to those around him, a reminder that true success is not measured by what we have, but by who we are, and that the pursuit of wealth and power is empty. Chapter 5. A New Perspective. Lucius Varro's decision to step back from the relentless pursuit of wealth marked the beginning of a profound transformation, not just in how he conducted his business, but in how he viewed the world and his place within it. The transition was neither immediate nor easy. It required constant reflection, discipline, and a willingness to embrace a new way of thinking that stood in stark contrast to the values he had once held dear. In the days and weeks following his decision, Varro began to explore what it meant to live a life guided by the principles of Stoicism. This ancient philosophy, which had initially seemed so foreign to his world of commerce and competition, now offered him a framework through which to understand his experiences and chart a new course for his life. One of the first lessons Varro took to heart was the Stoic concept of focusing on what is within one's control. This simple yet profound idea became a cornerstone of his new perspective. In his previous life, Varro had spent countless hours agonizing over the fluctuations of the market, the behavior of his competitors, and the whims of fortune, all things that were ultimately beyond his control. This obsession had led to anxiety, sleepless nights, and a constant sense of insecurity. Now, however, Varro began to shift his focus inward. He recognized that while he could not control the external events that impacted his business and his life, he could control his response to them. He could choose to approach each challenge with calmness and reason rather than fear and desperation. This realization brought him a sense of empowerment that he had never before experienced, a sense that no matter what happened in the world around him, he could maintain his integrity, his composure, and his inner peace. This new perspective was put to the test almost immediately. Not long after he'd handed over the daily operations of his business to his trusted partners, a significant crisis arose. A shipment of valuable goods, bound for one of the city's most important markets, was delayed by a series of storms. The delay threatened not only the profits from the sale, but also the relationships with key trading partners who had been counting on the timely arrival of the goods. In the past, such a setback would have sent Varro into a frenzy of activity, scrambling to mitigate the losses and preserve his reputation. But now, armed with his new Stoic mindset, he approached the situation differently. Rather than reacting with panic, Varro took a step back and assessed the situation calmly. He recognized that the storms were beyond his control, and that no amount of worry or frantic action could change the fact that the shipment was delayed. Instead of focusing on what he could not change, Varro turned his attention to what he could do. He communicated openly and honestly with his trading partners, explaining the situation and assuring them that every effort was being made to expedite the delivery. He also made contingency plans to cover any potential shortfalls, drawing on his extensive network of contacts to find alternative sources for the goods. This approach, grounded in reason and calmness, not only helped to minimize the impact of the crisis, but also strengthened Varro's relationships with his partners. They appreciated his transparency and his proactive efforts to address the situation, and they respected his ability to remain composed under pressure. What could have been a major setback for his business instead became an opportunity to demonstrate the values that now guided his life. As Varro continued to navigate the challenges of his business with this new perspective, he found that his relationships with others began to change as well. The ruthless, competitive edge that had once defined his interactions with colleagues and rivals was replaced by a more measured and thoughtful approach. Varro no longer saw his business dealings as zero-sum games, where one party's gain came at the expense of another. Instead, he sought to create mutually beneficial outcomes, recognizing that true success was not about amassing wealth at all costs, but about building trust, respect, and long-lasting partnerships. This shift in perspective also extended to his personal life. Varro had always been a man of few close relationships, his focus on business leaving little time for meaningful connections. But as he embraced the principles of Stoicism, he began to see the value of nurturing his relationships with family and friends. He spent more time with Claudia, his wife, and with his children, seeking to reconnect with them on a deeper level. He listened to their concerns, shared his own thoughts and struggles, and found comfort in their support. Claudia, who had long borne the brunt of Varro's obsession with his business, welcomed this change. She had always known that beneath his driven exterior lay a man capable of great warmth and generosity, but those qualities had often been overshadowed by his relentless pursuit of success. Now, as Varro began to prioritize his relationships over his business, she saw the man she had fallen in love with return. Their bond grew stronger, built not on the material wealth that had once defined their lives, but on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared commitment to living according to their values. Varro's children, too, noticed the change in their father. They had grown up in the shadow of his success, often feeling that they were secondary to his business. But now, as Varro made a conscious effort to be more present in their lives, they began to see him in a new light. He was no longer just the powerful merchant who provided for them. He was a father who cared deeply about their well-being, who sought to guide them not through commands and expectations, but through example and wisdom. As Varro deepened his understanding of Stoicism, he also began to re-evaluate his approach to wealth itself. The Stoics taught that wealth, like any external possession, was an indifferent, neither inherently good nor bad, but something that could be used wisely or foolishly. Varro realized that his wealth could be a tool for good if used in accordance with his values, rather than as an end in itself. With this in mind, Varro began to redirect his resources toward causes that aligned with his newfound principles. He invested in projects that benefited the community, funding the construction of public buildings, supporting local artisans, and providing aid to those in need. These actions were not motivated by a desire for recognition or influence, but by a genuine belief in the importance of contributing to the common good. This new approach to wealth also changed the way Varro viewed his legacy. In the past, he had imagined his legacy as one of power and dominance. His name etched in the annals of the city's history as one of its most successful and influential merchants. But now he saw that a true legacy was not about the monuments one left behind, but about the impact one had on the lives of others. Varro's legacy, he realized, would be measured not by the wealth he accumulated, but by the principles he lived by and the positive change he inspired in those around him. As Varro embraced this new perspective, he found that the anxiety and fear that had once plagued him began to fade. The external pressures of the market were still present, but they no longer held the same power over him. He had learned to detach his sense of self-worth from his material success, to see his wealth not as a measure of his value, but as a tool that could be used to live a virtuous and meaningful life. This detachment did not mean that Varro abandoned his business or ceased to care about its success. Rather, it meant that he approached his work with a sense of balance and perspective that he had never before possessed. He made decisions not out of fear or greed, but out of a desire to do what was right, to act with integrity, and to contribute to the well-being of others. This shift in approach brought him a sense of peace and fulfillment that he had never found in his previous life, no matter how successful he had been. One of the most significant changes Varro experienced was in his relationship with time. In his former life, time had always been a resource to be maximized, every minute accounted for, every hour dedicated to the pursuit of profit. But now he began to see time as a gift, something to be savored rather than exploited. He spent more time in reflection, in conversation, in simple pleasures that he had once overlooked in his quest for success. Varro's mornings, once dominated by the demands of his business, were now dedicated to quiet meditation and study. He would rise early, before the city awoke, and spend an hour or more reading the works of the Stoics, contemplating their teachings and considering how he could apply them to his life. These moments of solitude became a source of strength for Varro, a way to center himself before facing the challenges of the day. As he walked through the city, Varro began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way the light filtered through the trees in the public square, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the simple beauty of a flower blooming in a neglected corner of the marketplace. These small moments, once insignificant in the grand scheme of his ambitions, now took on a deeper meaning. They reminded Varro of the importance of being present, of finding joy and contentment in the here and now, rather than constantly striving for some distant goal. Varro's new perspective also led him to reconnect with his roots. He began to spend time in the neighborhoods where he had grown up, visiting the places that had shaped his early years. He reconnected with old friends, people who had known him before he had become wealthy and powerful, and who saw him not as a merchant, but simply as Lucius. These encounters grounded him, reminding him that his worth was not tied to his success, but to the relationships he had cultivated and the person he had become. As Varro's life continued to evolve, he found that the principles of Stoicism were not just abstract ideas, but practical tools that could be applied to every aspect of his existence. Chapter 6. The Law of Attraction. As Lucius Varro's understanding of Stoic philosophy deepened, he found himself drawn to explore other ways of thinking that might complement his newfound perspective on life. One concept that intrigued him was the idea that our thoughts and attitudes could influence the reality we experience, a notion that, in modern terms, is often referred to as the law of attraction. Though it seemed at first glance to be at odds with the Stoic emphasis on accepting things as they are, Varro began to see parallels between the two philosophies, especially in how they both emphasized the power of the mind. The law of attraction suggests that like attracts like, that our thoughts, whether positive or negative, have the power to shape our reality. The idea is that by focusing on what we desire, we can draw those things into our lives, whereas dwelling on fear and negativity will only bring more of the same. For a man like Varro, who had spent much of his life immersed in the practical world of commerce, this idea initially seemed abstract and perhaps a bit too mystical. But as he reflected on his journey, he realized that there was a practical application of this concept that aligned with the Stoic principles he had come to embrace. The key, Varro discovered, lay in the Stoic idea of prohairesis, the ability to choose how we respond to the world around us. The Stoics taught that while we cannot control external events, we can control our judgments and reactions. This inner control is what ultimately determines our experience of life. In this way, Varro realized the law of attraction could be seen as an extension of Stoic thought. By choosing to focus on virtue, wisdom, and positive outcomes, we naturally align ourselves with those very things. Varro began to experiment with this idea in his daily life. He noticed that when he approached situations with a positive, proactive mindset, expecting good outcomes, focusing on what he could contribute rather than what he might lose, things tended to go more smoothly. Opportunities seemed to arise more frequently, and challenges became less daunting. This wasn't because some mystical force was rearranging the world for his benefit, but because his mindset allowed him to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. One of the first areas where Varro applied this new perspective was in his interactions with his business partners and employees. In the past, he had often approached these relationships from a position of control and authority, expecting others to align with his vision or risk falling out of favor. But now, with his understanding of the law of attraction, he realized that a more positive and inclusive approach could yield better results. Instead of dictating orders or trying to impose his will, Varro began to focus on collaboration and mutual respect. He encouraged open dialogue, inviting his partners to share their ideas and concerns, and he made a conscious effort to listen more than he spoke. By fostering an environment of trust and positivity, Varro found that his business relationships flourished. People were more motivated, more creative, and more willing to go the extra mile. Not because they feared repercussions, but because they felt valued and understood. This shift in approach had a ripple effect throughout Varro's business. The atmosphere in his company changed from one of stress and competition to one of cooperation and shared purpose. His employees, who had once seen their work as just a means to an end, began to take pride in what they were doing. They felt a sense of ownership over their roles, knowing that their contributions were appreciated and that their success was linked to the success of the whole enterprise. Varro's interactions with his clients also took on a new tone. Rather than focusing solely on the bottom line, he began to consider how his business could genuinely benefit those he served. He looked for ways to add value, whether through improved products, better service, or more ethical practices. This shift in focus did not go unnoticed. Clients who had once seen Varro as just another merchant now viewed him as a partner in their own success. This strengthened his business relationships and led to more stable, long-term contracts. The changes Varro implemented were subtle but profound. By aligning his thoughts and actions with the positive outcomes he desired, he began to attract those outcomes naturally. But perhaps more importantly, this approach brought him a sense of peace and fulfillment that he had never found in his previous life of relentless ambition. He was no longer driven by fear or the need to prove himself. Instead, he was guided by a sense of purpose and a desire to live in harmony with his values. As Varro continued to explore the intersection of Stoicism and the law of attraction, he realized that this approach could be applied to every aspect of his life. In his personal relationships, he focused on cultivating love, kindness, and understanding, rather than allowing old patterns of control or resentment to take hold. He practiced gratitude daily, reminding himself of the many blessings in his life and how far he had come on his journey of transformation. One day, while walking through the marketplace, Varro encountered a young merchant who was struggling to get his business off the ground. The young man was frustrated, feeling that no matter what he did, he could not seem to attract customers or turn a profit. Seeing something of his former self in the young merchant, Varro approached him and offered to share some advice. "Tell me," Varro began, "what do you think about when you open your stall each morning? What goes through your mind as you prepare for the day?" The young merchant frowned, considering the question. "I think about how hard it's going to be," he admitted. "I worry that I won't sell enough, that people won't notice my goods, that I'll end up losing money." Varro nodded, recognizing the mindset all too well. "And do you think these thoughts help you succeed?" The young merchant looked down, shaking his head. "No, I suppose they don't." "Then perhaps it's time to change your approach," Varro suggested. "What if, instead of focusing on your fears, you focused on what you want to achieve? Imagine yourself succeeding. Picture your stall bustling with customers, your goods selling out, your reputation growing. When you approach the day with this mindset, you'll be more likely to see opportunities, to connect with people, and to attract the success you desire." The young merchant seemed skeptical at first, but Varro's calm confidence reassured him. Over the next few weeks, the young man began to practice what Varro had taught him. He focused on creating a positive experience for his customers, on presenting his goods with enthusiasm and pride, and on maintaining a hopeful attitude, even when things didn't go exactly as planned. Slowly but surely, he began to see results. Customers started to take notice, sales improved, and the young merchant's confidence grew. Varro's advice, rooted in both Stoic principles and the law of attraction, proved to be transformative for the young merchant. But it was not just about changing thoughts. It was about aligning those thoughts with action. Varro knew that simply wishing for success was not enough. One had to work toward it, guided by a clear vision and a strong moral compass. As Varro watched the young merchant's progress, he was reminded of his own journey. The path he had taken was not an easy one, nor was it without its setbacks, but through it all, he had learned that the way we think about our lives and our challenges has a profound impact on the outcomes we experience. By focusing on what was within his control, his thoughts, his actions, his character, Varro had found a new way of living that brought him peace, purpose, and fulfillment. The more Varro integrated these ideas into his life, the more he saw their effects. His business continued to thrive, not because he was driven by a relentless pursuit of profit, but because he approached each day with a positive mindset and a commitment to ethical principles. His relationships deepened, his sense of inner peace grew, and he found himself living a life that was richer and more meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. Yet Varro knew that this journey was not one with a final destination. The work of cultivating a positive mindset, of aligning his thoughts and actions with his values, was ongoing. There would always be challenges to face, doubts to overcome, and lessons to learn. But Varro was no longer afraid of these challenges. He welcomed them as opportunities for growth and self-improvement. In the quiet moments, when Varro reflected on how far he had come, he realized that his life had taken on a new rhythm, a rhythm that was no longer dictated by the chaotic ups and downs of the marketplace, but by the steady, deliberate practice of living according to his values. He had discovered a balance between acceptance and action, between the Stoic understanding of life's uncertainties and the belief that his thoughts and attitudes could shape his reality. As he looked out over the city that had been the backdrop to his greatest successes and deepest struggles, Varro felt a profound sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the challenges that had brought him to this point, for the lessons he had learned, and for the wisdom that had guided him through the darkest times. He was grateful for the people who had supported him, his family, his friends, his partners, and for the opportunity to share what he had learned with others. Most of all, Varro was grateful for the inner peace he had found. It was a peace that came not from external wealth or success, but from the knowledge that he was living a life true to his values, a life of purpose, integrity, and wisdom. And as he continued on his journey, Varro knew that this peace was the greatest wealth he could ever possess. Chapter 7. The Merchant's Legacy. As Lucius Varro continued to evolve in his journey of self-discovery and transformation, he began to contemplate the lasting impact he wanted to leave behind. With the principles of Stoicism deeply ingrained in his life, and his newfound understanding of the law of attraction, Varro's thoughts naturally turned to his legacy, not just in terms of wealth or business success, but in how he would be remembered by those who knew him and by the generations to come. Varro had long believed that his legacy would be built on the empire he had created, the vast network of trade, the wealth he had accumulated, and the power he had wielded in the city. But as he grew older and wiser, he realized that these external markers of success, though impressive, were not what would define him in the hearts and minds of others. His true legacy, he understood, would be the values he had lived by, the lives he had touched, and the wisdom he had imparted. The realization prompted Varro to take deliberate steps to ensure that his legacy would be one of lasting value, grounded in the virtues he had come to hold dear. He began by reassessing his wealth and how it could be used to benefit others. No longer driven by the desire to hoard or expand his riches, Varro saw his wealth as a means to promote the common good and to support causes that aligned with his Stoic ideals. One of Varro's first acts was to establish a foundation that would continue his work long after he was gone. This foundation, guided by the principles of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, would be dedicated to funding educational programs, providing resources for the poor, and supporting public works that improved the lives of the city's inhabitants. Varro took great care in selecting the trustees of this foundation, choosing individuals who shared his commitment to ethical living and who would carry on his vision with integrity. Varro also invested in the education of the city's youth, understanding that the future depended on the values and knowledge passed down to the next generation. He funded the construction of schools, where children from all walks of life could learn not only the practical skills needed to succeed in the world, but also the moral and philosophical teachings that would guide them in making wise and virtuous decisions. These schools, which bore his name, became known not just for their academic rigor, but for their emphasis on character development and ethical leadership. In addition to his public endeavors, Varro took a more personal approach to mentoring the young merchants and entrepreneurs who looked up to him. He spent time with these aspiring leaders, sharing the lessons he had learned, both from his successes and his failures, and encouraging them to prioritize integrity over profit and long-term relationships over short-term gains. He taught them that true success was not about amassing wealth, but about living a life of purpose and making a positive impact on the world. Varro's mentoring was not limited to business. He also shared his insights on life's deeper questions, on the nature of happiness, the importance of inner peace, and the value of resilience in the face of adversity. He spoke of the Stoic teachings that had guided him through his darkest hours, and how the law of attraction had helped him to shift his mindset and create a more fulfilling reality. These young men and women, many of whom had initially sought out Varro for his business acumen, found themselves learning far more than they had expected. They were not just gaining knowledge, they were gaining wisdom. As the years passed, Varro's influence began to permeate the city in ways that went far beyond commerce. The schools he had founded produced generations of thoughtful, ethical leaders who went on to serve the community with distinction. The foundation he had established funded projects that improved the quality of life for countless citizens, from building public baths and libraries to supporting the arts and preserving the city's cultural heritage. The young merchants he had mentored carried forward his teachings, building businesses that were not only successful, but also models of ethical practice. Yet Varro's legacy was not only about the institutions he had created or the people he had influenced directly. It was also about the example he set, how he had lived his life with integrity, how he had faced challenges with courage, and how he had sought peace and wisdom above all else. This example resonated with those who knew him, inspiring them to reflect on their own lives and consider what kind of legacy they wanted to leave behind. In his later years, Varro often reflected on the journey he had undertaken. He saw the transformation he had undergone, not just from a wealthy merchant to a wise elder, but from a man driven by external goals to one guided by inner principles. He was proud of what he had achieved, not in terms of wealth or power, but in terms of the person he had become and the impact he had made on the world around him. But Varro also knew that his journey was not unique. He understood that every person, at some point in their life, faces a similar reckoning, a moment when they must decide what truly matters and how they will spend the time they have left. Varro had been fortunate to encounter the teachings of Stoicism, to learn from wise mentors, and to have the opportunity to change his life's course. His hope was that, through his legacy, others would find the same opportunity, the same guidance, and the same inspiration to live a life of virtue and meaning. As Varro's health began to decline, he remained at peace. He had long since come to terms with the impermanence of life, understanding that death was a natural part of the human experience, and that it was not something to be feared. He viewed his final days as an opportunity to reflect, to share his wisdom with those around him, and to ensure that his affairs were in order so that his work could continue after he was gone. On his deathbed, surrounded by family, friends, and the many people whose lives he had touched, Varro spoke his final words. a simple but profound message that encapsulated the philosophy he had lived by. Live with purpose, act with integrity, and find peace within. Everything else is secondary. With these words, Varro passed away, leaving behind a legacy that would endure for generations. His life story became a model of how one could transform from a man consumed by the pursuit of wealth to one who understood the true meaning of success. His teachings were recorded and shared, spreading far beyond the city's walls, influencing countless others who sought to live according to the principles of Stoicism and the law of attraction. In the years that followed, the city honored Varro's memory with a statue in the public square, depicting him not as a powerful merchant, but as a wise elder, holding a scroll inscribed with his final words. It served as a reminder to all who passed by that true wealth was not found in material possessions, but in the strength of one's character and the impact one had on the world. The schools he had founded continued to educate generations of students, instilling in them the values of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. The foundation he had established continued to support causes that improved the lives of the city's inhabitants, ensuring that Varro's commitment to the common good would endure long after his death. But perhaps the most lasting aspect of Varro's legacy was the way he had inspired others to reflect on their own lives and consider what kind of legacy they wanted to leave behind. His story became a beacon for those seeking to live with purpose, integrity, and peace, showing that it was never too late to change, to grow, and to create a life that was truly worth living. In the end, Lucius Varro's legacy was not defined by the wealth he had accumulated or the empire he had built, but by the values he had lived by and the lives he had touched. His journey from a man driven by ambition to one guided by wisdom and virtue became a testament to the power of Stoicism and the law of attraction. A reminder that true success is measured not by what we achieve in the world, but by who we become in the process. Chapter 8. Reflections and Final Lessons. With Lucius Varro's passing, the city that had once thrived under the influence of his commerce and leadership found itself not only mourning the loss of a prominent figure, but also celebrating the enduring principles he left behind. As the years passed, the story of Varro's transformation became a cherished tale, shared among the city's people, in schools, and around dinner tables. His life was studied not merely for his business acumen, but for the wisdom he imparted, a wisdom that transcended wealth and power and touched the very essence of what it meant to live a meaningful life. Varro's legacy extended beyond the tangible contributions he had made. The philosophy that had guided his later years, rooted in Stoic principles and enriched by his understanding of the law of attraction, began to influence the way people in the city approached their own lives. His story served as a blueprint for those seeking a life of purpose, integrity, and inner peace. A city transformed. The schools Varro had established became centers of learning not only in practical matters such as mathematics, science, and rhetoric, but also in the study of ethics, philosophy, and personal development. The teachings of Stoicism, once known to only a few, became integral to the education of the city's youth. These schools produced a generation of leaders who were not only skilled in their trades, but also deeply committed to living virtuous lives. In the marketplace, the echoes of Varro's influence could be felt in the way business was conducted. Merchants who had once engaged in ruthless competition began to adopt a more cooperative and ethical approach. Contracts were honored with a handshake as much as with a signature, and the relationships between merchants, clients, and customers were built on trust rather than mere transactions. The idea that success could be achieved without sacrificing integrity became a guiding principle for many. The foundation Varro had established continued to thrive, channeling resources into projects that benefited the community as a whole. Public spaces were beautified, libraries were stocked with texts on philosophy and ethics, and programs were created to support the poor and vulnerable. The city, once driven by the relentless pursuit of profit, began to place greater value on the well-being of its citizens, inspired by the example Varro had set. A reflection on wealth and success. As Varro's story became part of the city's cultural fabric, it prompted people to reflect on their own definitions of wealth and success. The merchants who had once measured their worth in gold and silver began to consider the broader impact of their actions. They asked themselves whether their success was truly meaningful if it came at the expense of others, or if it was achieved through dishonest means. Varro's life taught them that true wealth was not about accumulating material possessions, but about living in harmony with one's values and making a positive impact on the world. Varro's transformation also led to a greater appreciation for the inner dimensions of success, qualities such as wisdom, resilience, and peace of mind. People began to see that a life well lived was not one free from challenges, but one in which challenges were faced with courage and equanimity. They recognized that the pursuit of external success was ultimately hollow if it did not lead to personal growth and fulfillment. The enduring power of Stoicism, the principles of Stoicism, which had guided Varro through his darkest times, became a source of strength for many in the city. The teachings of Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius were no longer just the domain of scholars. They were embraced by merchants, artisans, and even those who had once seen philosophy as irrelevant to the practical concerns of daily life. The idea that one's true power lay in controlling one's thoughts and actions, rather than trying to control the uncontrollable forces of the world, resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. The Stoic practice of focusing on what is within one's control became a common approach to dealing with life's challenges. People learned to accept the things they could not change and to focus their energy on the aspects of life they could influence, their attitudes, their decisions, and their relationships. This shift in perspective led to a more resilient and contented population, less prone to despair when faced with adversity and more capable of finding peace in the midst of uncertainty. The concept of amor fati, loving one's fate, also gained popularity as people began to see the wisdom in accepting life's ups and downs as necessary parts of the human experience. Rather than resisting or resenting the difficulties they faced, they embraced them as opportunities for growth and self-improvement. This mindset, which had been central to Varro's transformation, became a guiding principle for many, helping them navigate the inevitable hardships of life with grace and dignity. The law of attraction in practice, the idea that one's thoughts and attitudes could shape one's reality, an idea that Varro had explored through the lens of the law of attraction, also found a place in the city's collective consciousness. While some viewed it with skepticism, others embraced it as a practical tool for achieving their goals and creating a more positive life. Those who practiced the law of attraction in conjunction with Stoic principles found that it reinforced the Stoic idea of prohairesis, the power of choice. By consciously choosing to focus on positive outcomes, by aligning their thoughts with their values, and by taking action toward their goals, they found that they could indeed influence the course of their lives. This approach was not about magical thinking or wishful dreaming, but about cultivating a mindset that empowered them to act with purpose and confidence. The merchants who applied this philosophy in their businesses noticed a shift in their fortunes. By focusing on creating value for their customers, on building honest relationships, and on maintaining a positive outlook even in the face of setbacks, they found that success followed naturally. Their businesses thrived not because they chased after profits at all costs, but because they approached their work with integrity and a commitment to excellence, a personal legacy of wisdom. For Varro's family, the lessons he had imparted continued to resonate long after his passing. Claudia, who had been by his side through his transformation, carried forward his teachings, instilling in their children the values of Stoicism and the importance of living a life of purpose and virtue. Their children, who had once felt distant from their father, now looked to him as a source of inspiration, guiding their own lives with the principles he had lived by. Varro's descendants took pride in the legacy he had left them, not just the material wealth he had accumulated, but the wealth of wisdom and character he had embodied. They honored his memory by continuing the work he had started, ensuring that the foundation he had established remained true to its mission, and that the schools he had founded continued to educate future generations in the virtues of Stoicism and ethical living. Final lessons from Varro's life. As Varro's story continued to be told and retold, it became clear that the true value of his life lay not in the external achievements he had once pursued, but in the inner transformation he had undergone. His journey from a man driven by ambition to one guided by wisdom and virtue offered timeless lessons for anyone seeking to live a life of meaning and fulfillment. The first lesson was the importance of self-reflection. Varro's transformation began with a willingness to question the values and beliefs that had guided his life. This introspection allowed him to recognize the emptiness of his former pursuits and to seek a new path that aligned with his true nature. The second lesson was the power of choice. Varro's story demonstrated that no matter how entrenched we may be in our habits and ways of thinking, we always have the power to choose a different path. By embracing the Stoic principle of prohairesis, Varro was able to reclaim his life from the forces that had once controlled him and to create a life of purpose and integrity. The third lesson was the value of resilience. Life is full of challenges, setbacks, and uncertainties, but Varro's journey showed that these difficulties are not to be feared or avoided, but embraced as opportunities for growth. By adopting a Stoic mindset, Varro was able to face his challenges with courage and equanimity, emerging from them stronger and wiser. The fourth lesson was the importance of living in accordance with one's values. Varro's ultimate success was not measured in terms of wealth or power, but in the alignment of his actions with his principles. His legacy was one of integrity, honesty, and a commitment to the common good, a legacy that inspired others to strive for the same. Finally, Varro's life demonstrated the power of a positive mindset. By integrating the law of attraction with Stoic principles, Varro was able to create a reality that reflected his deepest values and aspirations. His story serves as a reminder that our thoughts and attitudes have a profound impact on our lives, and that by focusing on the positive and acting with intention, we can shape our world in meaningful ways. Conclusion: the lasting impact of Lucius Varro. Lucius Varro's journey from a wealthy but unfulfilled merchant to a wise and respected elder is a story of transformation, resilience, and the enduring power of Stoic philosophy. His life serves as a testament to the idea that true wealth is not found in material possessions, but in the strength of one's character and the impact one has on the world. Varro's legacy continues to inspire those who seek to live with purpose and integrity, reminding us that it is never too late to change, to grow, and to create a life that is truly worth living. His story is a beacon of hope for those facing their own challenges, offering a roadmap for navigating the complexities of life with wisdom, courage, and inner peace. As we reflect on the life of Lucius Varro, we are reminded that the most